Hello and welcome back to the Q&A. So, I've got a few pretty interesting questions this week, and if you've got any of your own, leave them down in the comments of the video. Anyway, let's get right into it, and first of all, there's a question from Vincent, who asked, what do I think the chances are of us seeing some sort of content scaling feature to basically make old content relevant again? And, well, one of the reasons why I chose this question is because the answer, quite literally, is very likely. In a recent Q&A, Ian Hazakostas was asked about, and by the way, he's one of the lead developer people for WoW, and he was asked basically about the Timewalker feature, which was basically just a feature where Blizzard could scale your character up or down to various different dungeons and things like that, which would allow you to do old content at the appropriate difficulty level. It's tech that they've had, like they've been able to do this for ages, but their biggest problem was finding some sort of reward scheme to wrap around it, because it's neat being able to be at appropriate power level for, say, Black Temple, but what the hell's the reward? They can't give you raid gear, they can't give you dungeon gear. What is it? Well, I don't know what it is, but apparently they do, because at that Q&A, he said that there is going to be, he basically hinted like, you know, we'll find out very soon. It very much, to me, came off like he was saying, you know, wait for our patch 6.2 announcement. So I would say that in patch 6.2, or something like that, we will likely get the Timewalker feature. What will it be? I don't know. How will it play out? I don't know. Like, it's such a strange feature in a way. Like, it's not strange. It makes sense, but what the hell do you get for a reward? Is it maybe a unique transmog set? Is it the case that they make maybe a dungeon sort of scaled up or whatever every 2 weeks and there's some sort of special event, go in and kill it where you get a cool reward? Who the hell knows? It's kind of funny, really. It's going to be extremely fascinating, though, to find out how they actually implement this feature, because if they do it right, it unlocks so much content for a lot of people. Because guess what? Not everyone's into mounts, not everyone's into transmog, and as much as going and trying to get an old mount or something is fun to some, does it really replace doing like a full-on bit of challenging content where you really feel like there's a reward that you've earned based on difficulty at the end? I mean, sure, it's not hard to get a mount from an old dungeon, it's just unlikely. But difficulty, I think, really is important, so if they can hopefully wrap that around with the right reward system, I think it could really breathe just a fresh breath of air or whatever into the game and really give it a shot up the arm that I think right now it desperately needs. It would be really cool. And next, let's move on to a question from Anne-Catherine Henson, who said, I would love to fight something that isn't good. And basically her point is that a lot of the enemies that we fight are corrupted, right? So you had Arthas, was good, then he was corrupted. You have Illidan, who was good, then he was corrupted. You've got Deathwing, who was good, then he was corrupted. You've got, well, I mean, hell, if you look at the Warlords of Draenor stuff, I suppose you've got Grommash, who was not corrupted, I guess, which is the big plot twist, but turned out to be a bit of a dick anyway. So maybe he's technically a bit of a pure evil. And Gul'dan, actually, no, Gul'dan is a good example of someone who I think is pretty much pure evil. Though you could argue that he was corrupted by the allure of power. Hell, if you even look at Kil'jaeden and Archimonde, they were, I mean, maybe they weren't good, but they were probably very vain people back 25,000 years ago, but certainly they were then corrupted to be full-on evil. And it is a very good point. A lot of the figureheads in World of Warcraft are originally good and then sort of got corrupted. And I think one of the sort of main things here is that it's quite hard to write a character that's pure evil from the very start. Just in terms of giving them like a character arc and things like that, usually it's kind of a tragic hero or, you know, like misunderstood, whatever. That's what Blizzard have been doing anyway. And I think from just a storytelling perspective, one of the reasons why that does generally work so well is there's a plot line that people can get a little bit more invested in, they can perhaps relate to it a little bit more. I think sometimes characters that are supposed to be pure mega evil, just, they're not really relatable, right? I don't think they always work sometimes. However, I do get the point, actually, and in terms of our main villains, it would be nice to fight something which isn't just kind of super, you know, corrupted dude, I suppose. And it was, I think for a lot of people anyway, it was a bit strange the way Garrosh just sort of went down the, oh, now he's corrupted route. I mean, technically Blizzard did say that he was using the Shah as a weapon, but if you look at how it was portrayed in-game, some of it does look like Garrosh was corrupted for a little bit, though, of course, after we killed him, it did seem to purge that corruption, and the actions that he took on Draenor just seem to be him doing what he wants to do, which I guess is fair enough. Though I think what does happen in the game is that we do get kind of these corrupted, like, fallen people who are perhaps do have a nugget of good inside them as our main, like, big hero villains, if you know what I mean, like the big names. But when it gets down to the actual cannon fodder, like demons, pretty feckin' evil. Even if, say, you know, your man Sargeras did kind of get corrupted or fall to darkness, or even if Kil'jaeden and Archimonde sort of, again, were corrupted, even if maybe the Lich King was corrupted, well, the Scourge are still pretty much 100% pure evil. Same goes for maybe the Twilight Cultists. I mean, you could technically say they're corrupted, but I think a lot of it just comes down to plot devices. And I think that right now, rather than focusing completely on whether a character was pure good at the start or anything like that, I just like to not be fighting orcs. It sort of dawned on me recently that we've been fighting a lot of them, and I know it's not really a new thing for a YouTuber or someone to call out the trope of, oh, we're fighting orcs for 2 expansions. But now that I think about it, I'm kind of welcoming patch 6.2, and I really hope that they are going to bring out some Legion stuff, so I'm fighting demon bosses instead of orc bosses. That would be kind of nice. And as for the next expansion, again, I wouldn't mind fighting the Legion, I wouldn't mind fighting Old God forces or Naga, something a bit different. And again, if you look at, say, the forces of the Old Gods, well, they're pretty evil. And in fact, the Old Gods themselves, like, they're pure evil. They're not corrupted, they are pure evil. Now, of course, many of the times they have featured in the game is because they do have that corrupting influence, so they corrupt a good character. There's substantial evidence that they were whispering to Arthas when he was in his sort of lonely walk throughout Northrend after the events of the original Warcraft 3, I believe, maybe I'm getting my timelines wrong. We know that they were sort of had their hands on loads of things, even Deathwing, like he was corrupted by them. So fighting the Old Gods themselves, that's something I really want to do again, and just literally fighting an Old God, not a puppet, nothing like that, the actual God itself, and their forces, which are pure evil. Just not the Twilight Timer clan. They got really dull very fast for some reason, but I'm totally down with fighting the Old Gods again. So I suppose the answer to your question is, it does seem like within the next 2 or 3 expansions, we'll be fighting a lot of the Burning Legion and perhaps a good bit of Old God stuff, and if that is the case, well, that's us fighting a lot of decently pure evils. Next, we've got a question from Comrade Richie, who actually has got 2 questions. I'll go on the first one first, though. And the first question is, there was a lore article recently published by Blizzard Watch about how a lack of content in Warlords of Draenor was not the real problem, it's the lack of storyline. Would I agree with that? And I think that I mean, I don't completely agree with the article. I think it's actually a large enough portion of both. So, first of all, let's tackle the idea of the lack of storyline. Patch 6.1 doesn't have a storyline, and perhaps that's, I'm assuming that's what the article was talking about. But 6.1 doesn't have much content at all, but also it doesn't have a storyline. And I was actually debating this with a person in my guild recently, but with storyline and stuff like that, it's, you know, storyline is important, more so just for the sense of momentum, as if there's something going on in the game. You don't necessarily have to be a role player or a lore buff to, I think, reap the benefits of there being good story going on, because at the end of the day, good story informs the content that happens. Generally, if there's a crap story, then the content made around that story won't be particularly good. So I think that these things really go in hand. Patch 6.1 doesn't have much of a storyline, and that's directly affected the quality of the content that came with it. And as for Warlords of Draenor itself, well, I think that the actual storyline and content of 6.0 in the short term was absolutely fantastic. You have really, really good dungeons, excellent questing. The problem is that the Apexis stuff is, like, basically no context. I mean, it had a bit of context, but no real story or just nothing of real interest to it, which kind of sucks. And then moving on, of course, we do have the Garrison campaign and the stuff going on with Khadgar. I love what's going on with Khadgar. As I've already, I think, said many times, I don't like the format of the Legendary Quest. I don't like how it's just super time-gatey, run into LFR to pick up any bosses you don't have on your regular raid. Just grind, like, tokens and things. Blah. Boring, don't like it. But the actual voice acting and cinematics and stuff, that's all awesome. As for the Garrison campaign, I think it was really cool, but it didn't feel as major sometimes. as perhaps, say, the 5.1 stuff. Like, in the end of 5.1, you thought there was some serious stuff going down. I didn't really feel as much like that with the Garrison campaign, and while it did have a few really cool spots, like, say, the Exarch trials with Yril, which that was one of the best quests in the game so far for me, or at least in this expansion, and while you do have a lot of cool stuff like that, loads of those quests were filler. And I know a lot of people weren't particularly happy. Like, some of them were just literally going to Shattrath and grind mobs. I don't really think that should be my weekly story quest. So, I suppose to answer this first question, I think that the big problem with 6.1 has been the lack of story, which has meant that there's a lack of really compelling content created around that story, which kind of sucks. And as for Warlords itself, well, I think we just could have needed a bit more context for all that Apexis stuff, and frankly, the actual content should have been more fun than what they put in with the Apexis missions. So really, I would say I agree with a bit of both. And next, there's another good question, which is, are players, such as myself, who are less about the math or statistics side of things and play the game for getting lost in the world and the story, in the minority these days? And that's a good question. I obviously can't really answer whether that's in the minority or the majority, I just don't have the numbers, but what I will say is that no matter what you're interested in, it is important to have good story stuff going on, as I covered in the very first point. If you're only interested in raids, if you're just don't give a crap about the lore at all, you know what? If there's a bit of awesome story which makes a really cool siege happen, and then Blizzard make a really cool raid around a siege, then that's kind of the story informing the gameplay that you get, and that happens all of the time. It's important to have a good story there for context, and also just for the general feeling of motion in the game. Like, it doesn't feel like it's, say, stagnant, just completely stagnant. Even if you're not the biggest lore buff, I think it does help to have an event going on within the world of Warcraft. Ultimately, it is the world of Warcraft. There should be stuff going on in the world. Now, getting back to the point of the question, though, about, say, people who are interested in lore, story, and immersion being in the minority, I think what's happened is that Blizzard's game design philosophies have changed over time, and that really has changed how immersive of a world they've crafted. I don't think World of Warcraft is as immersive as it used to be, and a lot of that is because it's definitely got a lot more of a sort of instant gratification style to it. You know, gear is a lot faster than it used to be. Leveling is a lot faster than it used to be. Hell, you can get 90 to 100 in 3.5 hours. That's what some of the subs have actually got, based on my 5-hour leveling video that I did a while ago. Things are really just fast, instant gratification, and also, I think, a bit expendable. It's at the stage now where we've got loads of 90s each, loads of level 100s, you've got lots of just high-end characters flying all over the place, which means that individual characters don't really, I think, have as much importance if you think about it. If you only had one garrison, that was your garrison, one character, and that's all you focused on, and maybe gearing and things like that were tuned so they were a bit slower, maybe leveling was a bit slower, I think that maybe fosters an idea or just a sort of playstyle where you really are that character, because that's just how it is. Whereas now we're like 9 characters or whatever, you know. It's just a very different game, I suppose. Things are, as I said, more instant gratification and a bit more expandable, which I think's definitely hurt the idea of getting immersed in the world like perhaps some of us used to be able to do. So I suppose in response to your question, maybe I think that there are less, relatively, of those players who are really into the immersion and all that stuff than there used to be, because maybe it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing. Maybe if the game was paced at a different rate, as it perhaps was some, you know, times in the past, then more people would naturally get into the idea of immersion and lore and story and things like that. Whereas now, perhaps, with things being just balanced the way they are, maybe it's all just a bit reductive, and it's all just change people's perceptions. Now, of course, it's important to note that I think now perhaps more people do know what's going on with the actual story. Maybe they're not as immersed in it, but if you look at Warlords of Draenor, I think that's a very well executed MMO, sort of, yeah, very linear campaign, but still, it's well executed. It tells a pretty good story. I don't think Nagrand was a very good finish to it, honestly. I mean, the story of Warlords of Draenor, I'd say, was great up until the end of Talador, and then, the Spires was really cool lore, but could have done with perhaps some mainline, like, Iron Horde stuff, and then Nagrand, I mean, I don't think the Grand was particularly great. Honestly, it feels like there should have been a zone after Nagrand that just tied the story into some sort of epic conclusion, and I don't think the dealing with some Pandaria problems was really the way to do that. Anyway, that's roughly what I think about those questions. I know I kind of rambled off, but I think the game design of lore and immersion and things like that is really interesting, and maybe it's something that isn't thought of enough. A lot of the time we just think of bespoke game systems and, you know, like numbers and things like that, whereas a lot of times, you know, it's worth just considering pacing and how that affects immersion and just the various things that I've already covered. So there you go, that's it for the video. If you've got any questions or comments, leave them down in the, well, comments for the video. Thumbs up if you liked it, thumbs down if you think I should die in a fire, and I will see you next time. I will.